Alachua County is a jewel in north central Florida. Its beautiful springs, majestic landscapes, commerce, and cultural centers nestled around the University of Florida make it a magnet for people around the globe. But how many Alachua County residents know about the early history of the area? How many people know about the planters and farmers who filtered in after Andrew Jackson and General Edmund P. Gaines fought wars in an effort to remove the Seminole Indians from the area? Finally, how many people know about the population of enslaved Africans who were treated like property and who were forced to labor, yet made it possible for Alachua County to grow? This true story is dedicated to those laborers. Who were they? Where were they from? How did enslaved residents of Alachua County arrive here, and what did they do when they were free? Today we will explore their story and move it from the shadows of history. We do not know exactly where all of those who were enslaved in Alachua County came from. We do know that they had origins in Africa, the birthplace of the human race and the cradle of civilization. The Africans were taken against their will. They were intelligent, creative, and talented people with a sophisticated understanding of science, agriculture, medicine, mathematics, architecture, religion, and much more. They had families, jobs, traditions, and responsibilities in their communities. These human beings were brutally enslaved by the Portuguese, the French, the Spanish, and the English, Americans, and others. Often other Africans from different tribes would sell them. Depending on where they were taken to dungeons located along the African coast, where they awaited removal from their homeland. From the dungeons, where the normal stay was 6 months, they were placed on ships. For most of the journey, these human beings were tied below deck, laid out in such a way as to squeeze in as many people as possible. They were treated like cargo. The conditions were horrifying. Many did not survive the journey. The ships transported the enslaved Africans to places all over the world. The descendants of these Africans make up what is known as the African diaspora, or the dispersion of people throughout the globe. Africans were taken to many destinations, including America. Some were eventually taken to Alachua County. They were sold on auction blocks to the highest bidder. Families were often separated for life. So how did Africans arrive in Alachua County, Florida? In 1860, enslaved Africans made up 54% of the population in Alachua County, the 7th largest slave-holding county in Florida. But Alachua County was not always like this. Once it was populated by the Patano Indians. Later, the Spanish established a cow farm on what was called the Alachua Prairie, now part of Payne's Prairie. Slavery existed in Florida since at least the mid-1500s, when Spanish explorers and settlers brought enslaved Africans to help build St. Augustine. When Florida was ruled by the Spanish, it was a magnet for enslaved people in slave-owning states like the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, and others. In Spanish-ruled Florida, they could live freely if they converted to Catholicism. Some worked as artisans, builders, and housekeepers, while others served in the Spanish military to help defend the Spanish territory. Not all Africans living in Florida at the time converted to Catholicism. Some chose to live as maroons or fugitive slaves in the Florida wilderness, hidden from white and some Native Americans who sought to re-enslave them. Still others owned property and lived among the Spanish. Some considered themselves Seminole Indians. Some of these people lived right here in Alachua County. The African-Seminole Indian relationship was complex. Some of those Africans were enslaved by Indian Seminoles, while others married, worked with, and fought alongside the Indians. Seminoles like Negro Abraham, Jumper John, and Ben Bruno were a few of the blacks who served as translators and counselors to the Seminole chiefs during the 1800s. The Spanish ceded Florida to the British in 1763 after signing the Treaty of Paris. This was not good for Africans, as the British practiced a harsher form of slavery and did not afford blacks any rights. By the end of the American Revolutionary War, British planters fled the state, and Spain was again in control of Florida. When the British left, they left some enslaved laborers behind. In an effort to increase the population, Spanish and non-Spanish settlers were allowed to settle in Florida. This time they did not have to convert to Catholicism, and they were allowed to bring their families and enslaved laborers. As an extra incentive, they were given 50 acres for each person that they brought to the territory, free or enslaved. This and the importation of hundreds of additional slaves contributed to a steady increase in the numbers of enslaved people in Florida. 1800 to 1860 can be described as a key period of enslavement in Alachua County. This period saw a marked increase in the planters and the establishment of Florida as a territory and eventually a state of the United States of America. It also saw the founding of Alachua County and the establishment of the county seat in Gainesville, so that planters and farmers could benefit from the new railroad line, a key development in making Alachua County one of the top producers of Sea Island cotton. The fact that Alachua County has an area called Arredondo in today's Gainesville does not hint about the life lived by the man that the area is named after, Don Fernando de la Maza Arredondo. He, like many others, was in the business of buying and selling Africans. In 1817, Arredondo was given 289,000 acres of land by the King of Spain for his service in the defense of St. Augustine. This land includes what we call Alachua County today. Early Alachua County settlers like Moses Elias Levy moved to the area to begin different projects, not the least of which was growing sugarcane. Levy, the father of future Congressman David Levy Yulee, reportedly moved to Alachua County in 1821 to build a utopian refugee colony for Jewish families in north central Florida. Whatever his level of success with that project, he was a buyer and seller of enslaved Africans in the name of growing and selling sugarcane. Despite all of the significant changes that took place in Alachua County, the three Seminole Wars stand out as the defining moments in the direction that the county would take. Because the Seminoles were living independently on their land, the Americans were nervous. Alachua County planters and farmers, threatened by the presence of Seminole Indians and the Africans living among them, wrote a letter to President Andrew Jackson in January of 1832. It read, "The subscriber citizens of Alachua County respectfully represent that the present situation of the county and its inhabitants induce them to request that a company of U.S. troops may be ordered from cantonment Brook, Tampa Bay, or some other station to Camp King near the Seminole Indian Agency to suggest as reason, therefore, that there are a much larger proportion of slaves than white persons owned by the citizens within 30 miles of the northern boundary of the Seminole Indian Nation, and more than 1,600 Indian warriors and 1,100 slaves belonging to the Indians, many of whom are traversing the county night and day." By 1845, Florida became a state. This must have been great news for the early planters who had already established themselves in Alachua County. It meant United States protection. Throughout all of the changes in the ownership of Florida, the Africans, for the most part, remained enslaved. I am standing in front of the Noonensville Cemetery. In fact, the Noonensville Cemetery is the only thing that's really left of the town of Noonensville, which was the first county seat for Alachua County. Noonanville was originally called Dells, and it was named after the planter brothers who established it. The Dell brothers were the largest owners of enslaved Africans in Alachua County. Noonanville was critical to this area. It was a place where the planters and farmers came to trade their goods. The enslaved Africans would bring things to the market to sell. In fact, if it was not for that enslaved population, Alachua County could not have grown at the rate that it did. The 1846 Alachua County tax record includes the names of owners of enslaved laborers like Stanley, Tyson, Townsend, Sanchez, Geiger, Pendarvis, Mott, Piles, and more. The oldest house in Gainesville was built by enslaved laborers who were owned by Major James B. Bailey, a cotton planter from Alabama. They started building the house in 1848. Bailey moved his family and some 34 enslaved Africans to the area in 1852. That the house is still standing is a testament to the skill and craftsmanship of those laborers. In 1853, Major Bailey sold 63 acres of his land to Alachua County to provide what would become the new county seat, Gainesville. When Alachua County residents learned that the new railroad line connecting Fernandina with Cedar Key was not going to pass through Noonanville, they voted to move the county seat southeast to the current location. The railroad, which was funded by David Yulee, was critical to the growth of Alachua County because it provided a way to transport all of the cotton, vegetables, and other items that enslaved laborers grew, harvested, packed, and delivered to trains. Corn, cattle, hogs, sheep, cotton, sugarcane, indigo, vegetables, and more. The unpaid labor of enslaved Africans was responsible for the rapid and prosperous growth of Alachua County. By the 1850s, Alachua County was bustling. Planter and farmer families attracted by the land and weather began to move here. The 1850 census lists 112 owners of enslaved laborers. Most of them owned one enslaved African. The Dells and the Stanleys owned the most.
You got to move, you got to move, you got to move, you got to move. For when the Lord gets ready, you got to move.
Alachua County was a magnet for planters in northern slave-owning states. Many of those planters came from South Carolina. They saw Alachua County as a place where they could buy land, a place that was beautiful, and a place that had awesome weather. So many of them packed up their families and they made the trek to Alachua County. Now imagine what that journey must have been like for those families and especially for those enslaved laborers, many who had to walk that distance. The Hale family was one of those planting families that moved here to take advantage of the great weather and the availability of land. And they settled on this property right here. And they built this home, which is 6,200 square feet. Enslaved laborers worked hard. They worked long hours to make this happen. And now you can look at this home today, which is a true testimony to the skill of those enslaved laborers. If you come and visit the Hale homestead today and you look under this house, you can look at the beams which extend from one end of the house to the other, and you can actually see the axe marks that are still visible to this day. I'm standing in the Kanapaha Cemetery, which is one of the earliest cemeteries in Alachua County. Right now we're in the Hale family plot, where you have Thomas and Serena Hale buried along with their children. The interesting thing about this plot is we also have the grave of Bennett Kelly. Bennett Kelly was just a boy when the Hale family moved to Alachua County. And he came here with his father, Edmund Kelly, and he worked on the plantations. After the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, after freedom was announced in Alachua County, he stayed on and worked with the Hale family until the day that he passed in the 1930s. Serena liked him so much and considered him to be a part of the family, and she said that she wanted him to be buried in the family plot. And that's where he is buried today, in the Hale family plot at the Kanapaha Cemetery. There were other Hale plantations in Alachua County. In fact, a wealthier Hale was Edward Hale, who at one time owned 100 enslaved Africans who lived in 20 cabins on his property. 4 different Hale brothers owned their own plantations, and they appear in the Alachua County tax records dated 1860 as owners of large numbers of enslaved Africans. Enslaved laborers were owned by people like the William family, the Hale family, the Thomases, the Chestnuts, the Mathesons, the Boatnights, the Ramseys, and a whole host of families owned plantations, and they came and settled here in Alachua County, and they created new lives on plantations that were located in the northern areas, the southern areas, to the east and to the west. They were located throughout the county. Everywhere you go today, you can see traces of them. I am in Jonesville, Florida right now on property that was owned by P.B.H. Dudley and the Dudley family. P.B.H. Dudley, the family patriarch, was among some of the key planters and farmers who lived in the area. On the 1860 census, we see that the Dudleys owned at least 29 enslaved people, and all of them were mulattoes. Enslaved people did not have any rights of their own. They could be beaten, worked, and sold at will. A few had more positive relationships with their owners, but nevertheless, the fact that they were bought and could be sold at will clearly illuminated their degraded status. Today, all that remains of the bustling plantations and farms are trees, grass, and other elements from nature that have crept over the spaces where enslaved laborers left blood, sweat, and tears. A few antebellum houses or portions of houses still stand as a testimony to that era. In fact, there has often been more of a focus on the houses and structures than on the Africans who labored in their shadows. There were no cameras or tape recorders available to document the millions of stories from men, women, children, and elders trapped in the system of slavery. Only in the wind might you hear the collective voices or whispers from the families that were torn apart, the women who could be raped at will, the many people who could be beaten for not following orders or for no reason at all. Some families passed down information through oral histories, while other families learned nothing because the subject was too painful for their relative to share. Selena Rollins, shown in this photo from the Micanopy Historical Society, was enslaved by the Rollins family in Micanopy. This picture was taken after slavery, but it demonstrates the kind of clothes that some of the enslaved women would wear. Men would wear trousers and shirts if they had them. Enslaved people were expected to wear the same clothes over and over again. Some had shoes, but most did not. The enslaved women were seamstresses, quilters, who provided clothes for everyone on the plantations. They also sewed for the planter families. These laborers did every type of work you could imagine. They essentially ran the farms and plantations on which they worked. They were builders, midwives, healers, carpenters, child care providers, animal handlers, inventors, blacksmiths, cooks. The list goes on. They are most known for their work as agriculturalists. They planted, cultivated, and harvested cotton and numerous other crops that were shipped via the train to places around the country. When white planters or farmers faced financial difficulty, they often sold off one of the enslaved laborers to get out of debt. Contrary to what some people have suggested, Africans were not happy and content to live out their lives as slaves.
Captain, keep on hollering, hurry, oh Lordy, I'm gonna take my time. Oh, good God Almighty, man.
They resisted in numerous ways. One way was not to do their assigned work. Another form of resistance was that they would do the work slowly. Some ran away from plantations to live as maroons. They'd run and live with the Seminoles, or sometimes they'd run to a state where they believed they could live freely. An 1864 ad in the newspaper Cotton States is titled "Ran Away." It reads, "From the subscriber near Gainesville, Florida, on the night of the 27th, a Negro man by the name of Edinburgh, black, 5 feet 9 or 10 inches high, came from Jefferson County in this state. I will give a liberal reward for his delivery to me or lodge in jail so that I can get him. James Whaley, June 4th, 1864. Another 1864 Cotton State newspaper ad was placed by none other than Madison Stark Perry, a big planter in Alachua County. He was offering a $400 reward for the capture and deliver of Tillman and Andy, who ran away from his plantation near Micanopy. By 1860, Alachua County had the third largest number of owners of 30 or more enslaved laborers in Florida. Most white residents of the day supported the institution of slavery because it was good for their lives and the economy of their communities. In his letter to the editor of the Tallahassee Sentinel, the former territorial governor of Florida, Richard Call, wrote, "The institution of African slavery has become the great agency of civilization. It is feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and administering to the wants and necessities of the whole civilized world. It is sending commerce and civilization to barbarous tribes and carrying Christianity into heathen lands." Debates about the merits of slavery took place all the time. Most white Alachua County residents had come to rely on the benefits of the system of slavery, which gave them more rank over blacks. Many things contributed to the start of the Civil War. One factor was the election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency of the United States. Southerners, for the most part, had come to rely on the labor of enslaved Africans, and they felt that their livelihood was threatened. Africans looked forward to the possibility of being free. Alachua County fully supported the Confederate cause when Florida seceded from the Union. The county was the site of a few battles during the Civil War. It was a storage site for cattle, corn, rice, and other food that the Confederate soldiers might need. The condition of enslaved Africans did not change during the war, as they were expected to continue working. In fact, their work often increased as they had to help oversee things and assist the plantation wives in the absence of the owners. Some enslaved Africans ran away. Sometimes their masters rented them out to the Confederate cause. Still, others registered to fight for the Union. An article written about one of the 1864 skirmishes appeared in the Chelsea Telegraph. 36 Negroes were brought away from Gainesville. Of these, 33 enlisted, and they mean enlisted in the Union. So much for the theory that enslaved Africans were happy with their condition. The writer also describes the actions of blacks. A house servant brought in an infield rifle which his master had set up against a fence while superintending the work of the field hands. Bringing the weapon into the town, he insisted on being allowed by Captain Marshall to strike a blow for liberation of his race. The Negroes procured clubs and begged for permission to fight on the side of the Yankees. So much for the theory of pro-slavery men that all Negroes are and must be ignorant, debased, unenterprising, cowardly, and supine.
Oh, the liars will be running in that great day, Lord.
News of the emancipation in Alachua County came around May 20th of 1865. Ellen Call Long, daughter of two-time territorial governor and plantation owner Richard Call, wrote a letter to a friend at the war's end. The Negroes around the country are behaving badly, as it was feared they would do. Many plantations are entirely deserted. I have told my Negroes that I expect that they will be freed, but in any case, they have got to work, and it is only a question of whether they will work for me or somebody else. They will catch the popular feeling soon that they are free. With a Negro, it means to sleep all day under the shade of a tree, and when night comes, catch a possum or two. Ellen Call Long was not happy with the end of slavery, but the black people were ecstatic. This is not to suggest that they were entering a time when things would be easy, but it is to say that some of the obvious traces of slavery had been removed. When news of freedom reached the blacks, some immediately left plantations and they couldn't wait to get away. Others chose to remain on plantations where former owners sometimes allowed them a place to live and land to raise food in exchange for helping with the crops. They stayed on at plantations and paid a fee to the landlord, who was often their former owner. Some of the blacks could not get away from the plantations fast enough. They left to search for family members who may have been left behind at an earlier time. Husbands searched for their wives. Women tried to find their children. Those who remained on in Gainesville established vital institutions such as the Union Academy, Mount Moriah Baptist Church, Fort Clark Baptist Church, Mount Pleasant United Methodist Church, and others. They also established institutions like the Rising Sun Lodge and other benevolent associations. At some point, blacks in Alachua County began to have Emancipation Day picnics on or around May 20th to celebrate their newfound freedom. A few communities in Alachua County still celebrate. Some of the descendants of enslaved people continue to use the names passed down to them by their ancestors or by the family members or owners on whose plantations their ancestors labored. Other families immediately dropped or changed their names. Henry Frederick Willis, the father of Ida Anderson, was 9 when slavery ended. She said, "I think they picked Willis out of the clouds." And that's what many of those enslaved laborers did. They simply made up names rather than carry on those old surnames. Another significant thing that took place during this period of Reconstruction was that black males were given the right to vote. They were the majority in the city of Gainesville. They were the majority in the Alachua County, and so they won many of the elections, if not most of the election. In fact, that early period of Reconstruction produced the man that we know as Josiah T. Walls. Josiah T. Walls was the second elected mayor of Gainesville, Florida. He was also a state representative. He was a teacher. He was a lawyer. He was a landowner and a farmer. He was also the last black person to represent the state of Florida in the United States Congress until Alcee Hastings and Carrie Meek went to Congress in the early 1990s. But there were also other black people who were elected to different offices. There were justices of the peace, there were county commissioners, and many more. Blacks who were enslaved in Alachua County prayed, worked, resisted, and had the fortitude to pass on a culture of excellence and beauty. They were vital to the growth and development of Alachua County, and their story must continue to move out of the shadows of plantations so that a more complete story of Alachua County may be told.